Yeah, without further ado, I guess I'll give some background to Dave and then I'll let him kind of take it away. So Dave started Bump in 2008 as a side project while he was getting his MBA at a Booth Business School at U Chicago. And he was a full-time student, so it's pretty impressive. And so the vision, I think, from what I understand, was quite simple back then, right? They wanted to create basically a mobile app that made the process of exchanging your contact information or phone number simpler by like tapping two phones together. And so they launched their product in 2009 when the App Store was kind of still in its early days. And from there, Bump grew and like was at the top 200 apps on the App Store, I think, at one point. And they happened to be like the billionth app downloaded on the App Store, which is pretty cool. Um, and so shortly thereafter, Bump applied and they joined YC's batch in 2009. And they interviewed with like PG, Jessica Livingston, and some of the big names from YC, obviously. Um, and then so they kind of had some pivots and had some difficulty establishing willingness to pay. And so they transitioned into their photo sharing feature, which kind of turned into Google Photos after the acquisition by Google. And so I think a few weeks ago actually was the 10-year anniversary of Bump's acquisition by Google. So um, congratulations,
Yeah.
David, on that again. Um, and so, yeah, their photo roll app at that point formed the foundation for Google Photos, which they've led for several years after that. And so, I believe about a year ago, Dave, you joined YC after leaving Google Photos. And yeah, so now you help some young founders take their ideas from zero to one, which is kind of what we'll chat through today. So, yeah, without further ado, maybe you can give us some background on yourself, Dave, and yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, hey everybody. Thanks for having me. This is a cool community to join. I know it's like dinner time and you're probably like commuting or helping family members eat or whatever. But if you're able to turn your camera on, it will be easier for me to tell you fun things if I see human faces versus gray boxes. Um, anyway, yeah. So as Jay said, yeah, I started a company long, long ago now, when I was young, and it was really just to solve this like very personal problem that I faced, which was I was this business school student. I was meeting all my new classmates at the beginning of the MBA program, and I just got tired one day of like typing everybody's name and phone number into my phone, and I thought like, oh, somebody should solve this. Like, why hasn't everybody done this yet? And the iPhone had just opened up apps. And so I decided like, I'll just get a friend and we'll make an iPhone app. That'll be fun. And we did it. And kind of without really trying it very hard, we built something that a bunch of people wanted to use. And it started growing pretty quickly from the get-go. And ultimately, yeah, we grew it to like 150 million users. We added a ton of different features, things that you could bump between different phones. And as AJ said, like never really figured out a business model that was going to be a venture scale type of business, despite raising venture scale money. And so we eventually needed to figure something out. And we learned by talking to our users that photo sharing was actually the most valuable use case that people were using Bump for. That led us in this photo direction. We built a couple other products that were better products at solving that specific pain point of photo management and photo sharing. And the last of which literally was like a demo app that we built. It only ran on my phone. We built it in a weekend, I think 4 days from like conception to the end. And then the next week I took it around and showed it to some companies, and we showed it to Apple, we showed it to Google, showed it to Facebook, and got acquired by Google to basically take that 4-day project that we had built and rebuild it with all of Google's technology and infrastructure, which we did, and that was Google Photos. So I worked on Google Photos from the very beginning of Google Photos until a year ago when I left Google to join YC. So have been through a lot in the last 15 years or so. Learned a bunch of lessons. Happy to share what I've learned with you guys. I assume like the fact that you're here must mean that you are either currently working on a startup idea or like a side project, or maybe you have aspirations to one day do so. So happy to talk through like thoughts on those sorts of things as well. Yeah, that's a bit of background.
Awesome. Yeah, so on that note, I think about half of the people attending this event today have said that they're tinkering with something on the side, but
Cool.
obviously aren't working on it full time. So maybe you can talk through like the pivotal moments and how you decided to ultimately, because you were pursuing your MBA full time, right, when you took Bump on full time. So how did
Yeah,
that
yeah, I would
decision
say,
come about?
the word full time for an MBA program. Apologies to anyone who has an MBA or is currently in an MBA program, but full time I think is a bit of a misnomer. It's not like a full time endeavor. You have a bunch of downtime, and to be honest, people ask me like, what was the value of doing an MBA, and I didn't actually finish the MBA. I dropped out, but I planned to do it when I started. The biggest value to me, to be honest, was having a little bit of slack in my life. It was the first time since I could really remember that I had any slack in my life. Like I went to a good school. I was working really hard on school and on sports. And then I went to grad school. I was working really hard in the lab. And then I got a full-time job. I was working really hard there. And so I never had time to just like mess around with side projects for fun. And it was the first time in my life actually where I had that space to do so, or at least I thought I had that space. And I really don't like, I don't think Bump would have existed without that like intellectual space that I had. And it's kind of crazy to think like, I don't think Google Photos would exist in its form today without that. So like going to business school was very valuable for me and I guess for the world. But at the time, I didn't understand that was the main value. So yeah, I love when people start their companies or whatever they're doing as side projects, because it lets you try out stuff in a less burdensome way, in a way that's like less scary. And if you look at a lot of the most valuable companies or startups that have been created, many of them at the beginning looked like toys. They looked like silly little things that like nobody's going to ever really use. Like, come on. And if they get shut down because nobody has like a great answer for why this is going to, take on some huge industry or win some big market or whatever, we wouldn't have a lot of the great things that we have today. So I love that for those of you who are doing things on the side, like I love it. And I think the key is to figure out when you've like seen the essence of something, or you've felt the urge internally that like, I got to just keep working on this because it's not, I believe in this thing. At some point you want to like go for it. And I would say like, you'll know when that time is right for you. And intellectually, your brain will probably tell you it's not yet time, but you'll know in your heart if you really should go do it. So that's how it started for me.
Got it. Okay. And then kind of going off of that, do you have like a framework for evaluating the business potential of like a side project? Because obviously having something that's a passion project you think is very cool is different from turning it into a company, right?
Yeah. This is always challenging because people are tempted to look at like existing markets and existing data points that you can get. And uh, those can be valuable to give you like numbers of things in the world, but they're very tough when you're looking at it holistically as like a number, right? So we see this often at YC and it kills us. When people say like, we're targeting the $15 billion CRM market. And you're like, what is that number? Like, where did you come up with it? And it's some number they found in some report somewhere that represents something, but they don't even know what it actually represents. What we much prefer, and I wholeheartedly recommend for anybody who's trying to like figure out if the thing you're working on could ever be big, is to do more of what we call a bottoms up analysis, where you basically just multiply two numbers. One number is how many possible customers are there for this thing that I'm making? And then the second number is how much could they possibly pay for it? Or how much could I possibly charge them? And the beauty of doing it this way is it actually makes you think about both of those numbers. And that's what we care about. That's what you should care about is, could there be one day enough people to care about this thing? And could they pay enough money for this thing that I'm making to actually be really important in the world as measured by dollars? And what throws some people off sometimes is they don't have proof on the first number yet. They know that they love it. They're like, oh, I love this product. And like all of my friends in this zone of the world, like they all seem to really like it, but like, will there be enough people who would want this in the world? And then the second question that always throws people off is like, what could I possibly charge them? And the best way to find out the second one is to try charging people and see if they'll pay. The second best way to do it is to see what else people pay for in their lives, or what else companies pay for, and see if your thing is like at all comparable or solves a similar type of problem for those people. And if the answer is yes, then like probably you'll be able to charge something like that. On the first thing, how many people are there? The common failure mode is today there's not a lot of people. But if I project the world forward 10 years, it actually turns out to be a ton of people. And so you can, I mean, this is the case for basically any dominant technology that you use in your life today, your mobile phone, any product that is on the home screen of your iPhone. It probably started as something that somebody would look at and be like, well, that's just for rich people, or oh, that's just for like tech nerds or whatever. But then it turns out that like everybody and their mom now uses those services. So that's how I recommend you think about it. If you find out the answer is like, yeah, this is not that valuable, like people, I can't imagine charging people all that much money for it, and there aren't huge numbers of people in the future that might potentially want it, then you might be in a space that's like an interesting little project to build, and maybe you can build a nice business, but it's not going to be like a world changing sort of thing.
Got it. So maybe on the topic of like monetization, as you've been speaking, I know, so Bump started as a free product, right, with the hopes of like boosting user acquisition and usage, which it ultimately did. But when it came time to monetize, you guys realized that kind of there wasn't high willingness to pay. So how did you approach reframing the business and product model um,
Yeah.
to capture that?
Yeah. The answer is we didn't. um, so the context here is a little important. Like, so we started in the fall of 2008. So this was when Facebook was like very popular on college campuses and was maybe just starting to kind of like get out into more of the mainstream world. Twitter was just like started. It was this darling new idea in Silicon Valley, but it was still very small and growing. And all the VCs loved those companies, obviously. And so when things came about that seemed potentially similar, like an app that lets you interact with people in the real world, which is what Bump was, all the VCs pattern matched, and they said like, oh, you want to get network effect, you got to be on every phone. So why would you do anything to inhibit that growth? You should do what Facebook does and just like don't charge for it at all, make it free. You'll figure out the business model later. And that's what everybody told us. And I think to some extent they were right. Like for us to be a massive success, we did need to get to a point where everybody had the app on their phone. And the only way to really get there, in our opinion, was to make it like very easy to get, which is free. The big difference that we learned over time is that people didn't spend hours using Bump every day, whereas they did do that on Facebook and Twitter. And when you have a bunch of time on a site, you can you can get other people to pay for access to those users, aka ads. Whereas for us, people used Bump once in a while, and when they used it for like 10 seconds, and then they were done. And the thing they were doing wasn't all that valuable. It was like sharing their phone number with someone, or like sharing some photos to their husband, or whatever it may be. And so we realized that like we were if you made a 2x2 grid of like frequency of use and value per use, we were in the quadrant you do not want to be in, which is low frequency of use and low value per usage, which is just like not good. And we experimented with a few different ideas that we thought might bump us in, up one square in that 2x2 or over one square. And none of them really were going to pan out to be a business that could generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So we decided, like, I guess this is several years in, we decided this whole thing is not going to work. Like, we don't see any paths where this could be a standalone business. So we could have just tried to get to like cash flow break even. I think we actually could have gotten there. But then what? We would have just had this kind of zombie company that would just continue on for a while and nobody would be happy. So instead, we decided, like, let's find an actual big problem that we know everybody in the world like really cares about and will pay real money to solve. And let's go solve that problem. And this was when we had kind of discovered this photo sharing and photo management issue. And we decided, like, well, screw it. Let's just go do that. Like, we know that is something that people are going to really love. So let's just do a full pivot. And it worked out.
I guess hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I wouldn't, if it didn't work out, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be listening to me. So there you go.
so on that note, I guess like what tips do you have for effectively turning on product monetization, and maybe do you have three like do's and don'ts for how to effectively do that?
Yeah, I would say my first tip is don't necessarily think of them as like separate steps. Like, hopefully what you're building is valuable either to you or to people that you know, customers that you know. Um, and if that's the case, then hopefully you or they should want to pay for it right away because it's really valuable. So I wouldn't, like, I don't encourage people generally to think about it as two steps. You may decide after you've like decided, okay, yeah, this is the product, here's what it's going to cost, here's how you'll pay for it, here's our go to market plan. You may decide to like not charge for some specific reason, but I would have that be the not default answer. I would have the default answer be, this is what the product does, this is how much it costs to use it, and here's how we charge. Because that prevents you from getting into these pretty sticky spots that I see a lot of companies get into, where you built a thing, it kind of is useful to some people, they're telling you they love it, they don't want to pay for it yet because blah blah blah, they say some reason, and then you're like, well, I want to get some like feedback, I need a quote design partner, and you don't charge for it, and then time passes and you don't really learn why they don't actually love your product, but you eventually find out that they don't actually love your product because when you do try to charge them later on, they don't really want to pay for it. So I recommend that companies learn as much as possible in as short a period of time, and the best way to do that is to try to charge for your product right away. So yeah, that would be my default answer.
Okay, so I think Maddie has a question regarding that. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, Maddie?
Sure. So we are in the digital therapeutic space, and we have modular actually application, which is a part of it. It's a VR game, so we can potentially like have the VR game as a separate module and then make it free for a while to get some feedback. Just wanted to see your like what are your thoughts on how to go about it? Whether we charge people because it's just a small part of the module, or just make it free for everyone to test it out.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked this question because there's another point to make here, which is I think those of us who spend time at big companies like Google, our default belief is that in order to know anything that you can be confident about from your users, you need a lot of them to try a thing so you can like get statistically significant data or whatever. In startups, that's like almost universally not the case. And this screws so many founders because they like think they need to talk to or get a large number of people to try a thing before they can know if it's working or not. But it turns out if you can just talk to actual users of your thing, you'll know very quickly whether they like it or don't like it by just talking to them or observing what they do. So I guess like specifically what I would recommend is if you think that this product you're building is something that is valuable that people should be willing to pay for, you should at least be having that conversation with users when you're talking to them. You should understand like what do they pay for today that is comparable or similar? Like what is the alternative to your solution and how do they pay for it or who pays for it? And only in the case where you are very satisfied that it's very valuable, but for some other reason, specifically, you can't get them to try your thing or use your thing unless you give them a way to use it, as a trial or for free. Unless you have a very specific reason for that, I would not go in that direction because I think it's going to corrupt your learnings. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but like, have you ever had a friend come to you with like a project they're working on and they're like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Like, what do you think? and you think it's stupid, but instead you say to them, oh, this is really interesting. Like, I like how you're doing this. Like, very cool. Like, I'm glad you're doing it. Nice. They leave that conversation thinking like, oh, wow, I'm building something people want. This is great. You leave that conversation thinking that guy is such an idiot. Like, what is he wasting his life on? And I would advise don't get yourself in that spot.
We plan actually to have some sort of like getting feedback from our friends. So you recommend not to do that?
Well, no, sorry. Who is the person who's making a lot of noise here? Can I mute them? AJ, can you figure out how to mute them?
Yeah. Sorry.
So this is another interesting point. Like I actually think talking to your friends about your what you're building is great if they are the person you're building it for, right? And I think that's the like main thing is they need to actually be the user. And when you talk to them, you should not show them what you've built and say, what do you think? Instead, you should like use them as a customer, and you should like try to learn as much about that customer's life and what they do without showing your solution at all, right? That's where you actually learn what the problems are. And then you can go to devise the right solutions. But again, like I think this is a thing that is a bad learning for startup founders that is perpetuated at big companies, which is the confusion of usability testing with talking to customers. And I think like at Google, I mean, I ran the UXR team at Google for Google Photos. They were in my team, and we had, I don't know, 12 people. And like their job was entirely not to understand what customers need. Their job was to decide if the solutions we had built were navigable by the users that we might have, and which are totally different things. And I think startup founders often do UX research when in fact they need to be doing like customer research. Very different things.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Maybe we can kind of transition to product market fit, which I know is a hot topic for startups, right? So do you have an opinion on how founders should kind of approach holding out for product market fit on a product that they have, versus evaluating when like a pivot is necessary because their product's not needed by the market?
Right. Yeah. This is an age-old question in startups. Like we get to ask this question all the time. Like, do I just need to keep trying, or have I proven sufficiently that actually there's not a real problem here, and so I should pivot and go on to something else, or like entirely change my idea and go on to something else? There's not I don't have like a framework or a rubric or a heuristic to use. The big question is, do you feel like you have sufficiently attempted to solve the problem that you understand? And have you kind of like run out of steam on coming up with new ideas for how to solve that problem? If so, then it's likely the problem isn't actually a valuable or real problem, and that you kind of got the problem wrong. In those cases, yeah, you should like move on and do something else. But in cases where you're like very convinced that the problem is real, but for some reason you just haven't figured out the right solution to the problem, those are the cases where you got to stick it out and keep going, right? I mean, again, so many of the products that we each use in our daily life could have easily been dismissed as like, this isn't going to work. Like the first try didn't work, so like, forget it, let's move on. Airbnb would not exist, right? DoorDash would not exist. All these companies would not exist had they taken that idea. So it's kind of a gut feel. Again, you got to just decide, you know, whether it's right to keep pushing or not. I don't have a better answer than that. Yeah, this is one of the toughest things I think in startups. One thing that you can know for sure is if you do that market math and the total biggest number you could ever come up with for the number of customers and the biggest number you could ever imagine charging them multiplies out to like not a large number of revenue per year, then you probably should like not work too hard to solve that problem, because it seems like it might be a small market.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. So you spoke a lot about like your customer centric approach to like product development and user discovery, right? So maybe from observation, like how should startups maintain that approach and that closeness to the customer as they kind of scale their teams and scale the company?
Yeah. It's very hard. And you have to, I think the answer, very simple, is you have to be very deliberate about it. You have to make it like a very clear focus of you, the founder CEO. It's very easy when things start to work to kind of outsource a lot of the job to other people. Like you want to, grow your company and hire great people, blah, blah, blah. But like, first of all, when you think you have product market fit, you probably don't yet. It's probably like a mistake. You're probably understanding something wrong just because it's so hard to get true product market fit. So it's bad to like scale up before that. But even afterwards, like if you lose that culture of actually deeply caring about your customer, even if you are successful at the beginning, you're going to blow it because you're going to not have that discipline anymore to really understand users and continue to build very high quality products for them. And so, yeah, I think like the only recipe I've ever seen work is have the founder just be maniacal about talking to the customer. And like you do it every day, you make everybody on the team do it. And there's some like tactics that I think work pretty well to enforce that culture at your company. Things I like are have everybody be responsible for customer support. Like if you're building a product that has any idea of like customer support, make every single person in the company do it and actually be responsible for it, and not just as like a little fun tax that you talk about, but like actually solve tickets for people. On Google Photos as an example, we were talking about Twitter before we started. I was pretty active on Twitter when I was at Google, and I would literally like every night in bed, I would load up a Twitter search looking for anybody who mentioned Google Photos. And I would just look at the raw stream of tweets, and it's like thousands of tweets a day. And I would personally respond to like 10 or 15 of them and go solve their problems the next day. And my team hated it because I would come in the next day with like random bugs that I found in the world. And they would say like, oh, it's so disruptive. Like I'm trying to work on my, L7 project and you're disrupting me with these stupid bugs. And I would say like the users of Google Photos don't care about your project. They care that the app isn't doing what they expect it to do. So we need to fix it for them. And we need to know where we screwed up, because we screwed something up if that's the case. And I think that mentality is the right mentality. If you want to build anything important, or if you want to like maintain something that has started to work as you scale your company.
Very interesting. So I think Bolus has a question about how you lay the foundation to eventually scale Google Photos. You're going to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So in the cold start problem, I know it was mostly about Uber, but there was a mention of like Google Photos at one point in like the section on come for the tool, stay for the network. And
okay.
I think about, I'm just curious because obviously Google Photos started off free, grew very, very immensely, and now I think it charges to the storage or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like how did you all think about like network effects of Google Photos, what you all had to get like right? What are the key pillars you had to get right for it to grow as it did?
Yeah, very interesting. I actually have not read that book. I should. Andrew sent me a copy of it. I have not read it yet. That's cool that they talk about it. We definitely like that Chris Dixon. It's a Chris Dixon blog post called "Come for the Tool, Stay for the Network." I recommend it if anybody hasn't seen it yet. It's basically this idea of like if you want to build a network, pretty much universally, what you actually need to do first is build a tool that's useful to one person, get them to be using that tool because it actually solves a problem they have. And then as a side effect, they are participating in some network. And if you get enough people to start doing that, then all of a sudden the network kicks in and there's like great reasons to keep using the product, even if you don't need that tool anymore. I mean, Instagram is like the canonical example of recent note that use this playbook, and it works great. To be honest, on Google Photos, when we think about the sharing part of Google Photos, we certainly like use that idea. And I remember sending like a little manifesto I wrote to the team, like citing specifically that Chris Dixon blog post. But for the more broad product, we did not think about it as a network, to be honest, at the beginning. In fact, I mean, for anybody who was at Google in that time period, in like the 2011 to 2013 time period, when we got acquired in 2013, you will know that there was like a huge push in the company to building Google Plus and the network, right? And there was like this huge bias towards, if it doesn't have some social component, then like it's not valuable. And we were very controversial. We got acquired and I came in and I'm like, no, that doesn't matter. Like, forget that. Facebook won. We should give up. They are going to whoop our asses. Like, what we can build that will be really valuable to the world is a private photo management tool that people want to use. Like, nobody's built that. And there's a big need coming. And I had a bunch of confidence that I was right about that, because I had been one of the, top 1% iPhone users of the last 4 years while working on my startup, which was doing stuff on iPhones, that I just really deeply understood, like, yeah, everybody's going to run out of space on their phone. There's got to be a cloud solution. The answer is not like put it in a Dropbox folder. Like, we need a tool built for this. And so I was just very confident that was going to work. But there was immense pushback from the company to that plan. They thought, like, a private photo tool, there's no way that's going to be valuable. Like, we need to build a network. And I just held my ground and pushed back. And I said, no, like, one day if we're successful in sharing, sure, there'll be some great network effects. But there's a lot of value in storing and organizing people's photos and making it really easy for them. And so, yeah, we launched it as that, and it kind of worked. And I would say, like, the growth of Google Photos, primarily, if I'm really being honest, primarily it was that people wanted a solution to the problem, and we offered a great solution, and we offered it for free. That is the reason it grew, not for any network effect reason. Yeah, like, on the margins, sure. If your spouse used Google Photos, you were way more likely to use it yourself. But like, holistically, it was just, we tried to build a great product.
Very cool. Thank you.
So maybe we can kind of shift the focus now to YC, because I know a lot of people are interested in that, obviously.
Cool.
So YC is kind of known for evaluating the founder more than the idea, right? And that results in lots of pivots in every batch that goes through. So in your experience, is it kind of a red flag if applicants seem very deeply rooted in their idea, or is that a positive sign?
Oh, it's not bad at all. No, it's great. Big if their beliefs and insights are credible and they can explain them. And I think that's the big difference. You're totally right that YC, and in our opinion, like all very early stage investors, should be judging the founders primarily. And the idea, at the very least, the idea is a way to engage with the founders and determine if you think that they're really capable or not. But sometimes founders have great ideas, like, of course, and it's wonderful when they do. Often those ideas come from personal experience, and we love it when that's the case, because then they're very credible. They've like either faced this problem themselves and they want to build a solution that nobody has built for them yet, or they worked at a company that solved this problem, perhaps, and it's only available to that one company, and they want to bring it to more companies, right, or bring it to more people. Those patterns are great when we see them, and we love it when people have conviction about the problem space based on actual insights that they can articulate about the world. The danger zones are when you are obsessed with a problem that ultimately turns out to not be a real valuable problem. And this happens all the time as well. And typically, like, if I was going to advise you on how to avoid getting stuck in that trap of like building a thing that you're really convinced is important but actually isn't, is figure out, how did you come up with this idea? The most dangerous cases are where you are thinking about problems in the world that you could go solve. You're like brainstorming startup ideas. In those cases, it's very easy to seek out areas that you actually don't know anything about and think that you can go solve the problem. The opposite of that, where you have like deep experience, you spend many years of your life working on some hard problem, and you like very much understand why it's so hard. Those are the ones that we're way more excited about. And we love seeing founders run towards those like very challenging, hard problems. and it's again a little counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. It's very easy to think that you can go solve some problem that you know nothing about, because you don't understand why that problem is hard, or why everybody who's tried to solve that problem previous to you has failed. But if you've been deep into an area, you both understand that it's like really fucking hard, but also you kind of understand like how you would go about doing it if you were going to try. And those are the ones that actually turn into really big companies. So yeah, that's like a rough rubric I would use.
So on that same note, Nicole asked if you have any favorite programs or resources for teams who aren't quite ready for funding yet, but are still exploring the problem space or maybe developing their product.
Yeah. Let's see. Well,
It's a bit of a vague.
first of all, I would say like, I'm curious what you mean by this state where you're like, you want to work on a thing, but you're not ready for funding. I don't know, like funding doesn't make you do anything. It's just a number in a bank account. It gives you the power to do certain things if you want to. But like, I guess more generally, if you're not quite ready to like work full time on a problem, let's say, and you want some more resources, or like you want to learn to get better at startups. I mean, it sounds like I'm talking our own book, but I would say the YC content that we produce, if you just like literally subscribe to our YouTube channel, that is some of the highest quality content that I have ever seen with respect to startups. And the reason is that the people creating that content are actual startup founders who have built a thing from nothing to something, which is weird. Again, most of the content that you'll consume in the world was not actually created by the people who did the thing. Like if you consume VC content as an example, most of the people who are talking about those things, they're relaying stories from portfolio companies that they worked with. Whereas at YC, like every single one of us was a founder. And so when we tell those stories, like it was literally us that made that like stupid mistake. And we're trying to like tell people so they make new mistakes and not the ones that we've made before. So yeah, check out the YC YouTube channel. I think the only other thing that I recommend would be just trying to go as deep as possible with your customer or the problem area that you're in. And this might mean like following people who are interested in the same problem. There's probably a ton of activity on Reddit or other forums with respect to that specific community that you're trying to target, and just become as deep as possible. This is the thing, like I often get asked by like the either non-technical or less technical founder when the team needs to like go build something and they don't quite know what to do. The best answer is just decide that you are going to be the person in the world today who devotes the most energy to learning about your customer. Like, it seems like a daunting sentence. I'm going to be the number one person today who learned about blank, but it's actually like very doable. If you think about whatever blank is, what would you do to be the person who went as deep as possible today on that? It's actually quite easy. You just like spend all day watching YouTube videos or Googling or like chatting with OpenAI about a thing. Like you could actually do that if you care. And doing that actually is what separates the really world-class founders from the median startup founder.
So kind of on the same topic of not quite being ready to take your idea or startup full time, someone from the audience asked before the event, they said that they need to push headfirst to take their lingering idea to the next level. How do you get the guts to do this while being the head of a household financially?
Yeah. I think it's an important question, and I'll just say this, it's a whole lot easier to like go gung-ho on a startup when your personal burn rate is low. Yes, that is certainly true. What's great, I would say, is these days startups are like pretty well understood. We understand the dynamics of the startup market, and therefore investors are willing to invest a lot more money than they were when I started my company. And at the same time, the cost of actually doing a startup has gone way down, like orders of magnitude lower. When we started Bump, we like literally had to rent machines, like actual specific machines in a colo. Whereas today you can just like spin up your instance and pay a few bucks and you're up and running. So I think it's a whole lot easier to do it today. But yeah, like some people have cash needs. And I would say like for those types of people, you probably need to figure out a way to raise some funding for you to actually go full time on it. But the beauty is there's a lot of money to be invested in startups. Specifically with YC, like you fill out a web form, it takes maybe an hour at most to fill out the web form. You do a 10-minute interview with us. We make our decision. If you get in, you get $500,000, and you can do a lot with that, even if you have a mortgage and a family and all that. So I would say of all the times ever in the history of humanity to start startups, like now is the best time. It'll probably get better, but now is the best time so far. Yeah, what are you waiting for? Try to make it happen.
So on that note, I kind of saw a lot of people asking this in the forum for the event, and also just people I've spoken to in the last few weeks who are considering applying to YC, that merely have an idea, haven't really worked on a product at all, or haven't built up any progress. And although there's lots of, I guess, content out there from YC saying all you need is an idea, there's still this hesitancy to apply because they don't want to, stifle their chances maybe in the future. So how would you respond to those people who are worried about applying with merely an idea?
Yeah. In almost all cases, applying multiple times to YC is viewed as a positive signal and not a negative signal. In fact, I don't know the stat offhand, but a scary high percentage of the companies in the last batch, like in the summer 23 batch that we just finished, somewhere north of 25%, probably less than 60%, in that zone of percentages, are companies that it was not their first time applying to YC. So like that's just the context for you, which is like you should totally apply. There's no downside to applying early. The second fact is that we say it everywhere, but like your idea can be like very recent. And again, the reason why that works is that we're judging mostly the founders and how impressive you are and how capable you are, and not necessarily your idea. Again, because we know that as you pursue an idea and understand the customer deeply and the problem, in so many cases, you're going to like materially change your idea, that going deep on the idea as a way to judge you is like not useful, because you're going to probably change that idea anyway. So you should know that is true as well. Like literally this last batch, I worked with 22 companies, and of the 22 companies that I worked with, how many of them were working on the idea that they applied with? At most 10, I'll say that, right? So like just that's like specific context for all of you. It is not as important as you think it is. What I would say is important is showing that you're a very capable set of founders, and you have your whole like previous life history, which you can't go back and change, like, so don't have to worry about that. But what you can do between like now and when you maybe get an interview, let's say at YC, is make as much progress as possible in the time that you've got. And I think another thing that throws people off is they try to internally judge the absolute amount of progress that they have made. And they sometimes judge that as like not a lot of progress. Like, oh, all we've done is like built the MVP and we've got like a few people trying it, but like, that's it. That doesn't sound very impressive. If you said that same fact, but said it this way, which is in the 10 days since we finished our YC application, we wrote the MVP version of the app and got it into the hands of 5 users already. Then we read that and we're like, wow, in 10 days, they built an entire product and got some customers to use it. That's quite impressive. And so progress per unit time, the slope of your progress is way more important than the absolute value of the progress you've made. And so, yeah, I would think about it that way as well. And when you look at yourself through those lenses, you might be surprised that you're actually like looking pretty good. You're making lots of progress, you're learning, you have good insights, and you're an impressive team. Like that's exactly what we look for. Those are the people who end up continuing and building amazing, important companies.
Awesome.
Hi, David. So I have a question about raising funding. So I know that some companies, they can be, they can build a prototype pretty quickly and then show traction and ask investors to get fundings. But there are other products that requires more time, like full stack of software, or even like building a chip or something that requires more resources. I wonder for this type of companies, like what would you like recommend when they are trying to raise funding, when they basically only have an idea?
Yeah, this happens all the time, and it's a great point. Like, you know, I think there's a common misperception about YC specifically, that like we're only interested in software companies that can like write their MVP within the 3 months of the YC program. And that's not the case. Like, we fund fusion companies, we fund supersonic aircraft, we fund satellite companies, like all sorts of things that require hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of funding to even like build the first version of the thing. So the specific answer to the question is you want to make milestones that show that you are making progress towards your goal. And then you go and do what you have to do to hit that milestone with the amount of money that you've raised. And then the goal is to raise the next round of funding to be able to achieve the next milestone. And that works if the final destination of what you're building is really massive, right? If you're building SpaceX, it's totally cool to raise billions of dollars of funding, so long as you can do so in an iterative fashion where you can keep making progress and not, you know, dilute yourself to zero while you do it. And so, yeah, that's how I would think about it, is like, what's the milestone you need to, you know, get to the next level where you've solved some of the most important issues so far, but now it allows you to go solve the next big problem.
I see. So does it mean like YC and other investors at the very beginning, they will basically look at the founder's capability and also like what their milestones are, and then depending on these, they will decide if they want to fund or not?
Yeah, and I would say, I think that's right. And I would add one thing, which is, if you're doing something that we all believe is going to require large amounts of funding to do, let's just like take an example. Like, you want to build a rocket company. You're probably going to need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. The one additional burden or like bar that we would put out there is, do we think that person is going to be successful at raising hundreds of millions of dollars? And there's definitely been many cases where a team comes along with like a very strong technical plan to do some audaciously hard thing, but none of the founders, you know, in our opinion, or in investors' opinion, are going to be the type of person who will be able to go raise huge amounts of money. In those cases, like, sometimes it doesn't work because that is a critical recipe, or a piece of the recipe, a critical ingredient needed. And if you don't have that and you're trying to do one of those things, sometimes it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gaurav, go ahead. We can't hear you. Yeah. Okay, maybe while you figure out your mic issues, we can go on. So there's a question regarding hardware startups. So what are your views on hardware startups launching their products via Kickstarter or like Indiegogo?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a credible opinion on this, to be honest. I think, first of all, hardware startups are harder. This is absolutely true. I've seen this in my personal angel investing as well as friends' companies. It's hard to do hardware for a number of reasons. One is like your iteration cycle is a lot slower. And two, just fundamentally, somebody's got to put money in to build the thing so that you have the chance to sell it. Either your customer needs to put the money in or you need to put the money in. And when you're doing that, if you estimate demand incorrectly, even by a small amount, it can like have disastrous effects to companies unless you have like piles and piles of money to you know, make up for any mistakes. And so I've seen lots of very promising hardware companies, you know, not achieve their full potential because of like what I would call in hindsight just like unfortunate finance estimate mistakes, and that sucks. So that's challenging, specifically for like Kickstarter or these sorts of things where the customer is basically like funding the R&D to build the thing. There's certainly cases where it works, and it's a nice it may feel like a nice validation that like, all these customers like have already put their deposits down for this thing, like sounds great. But it's not like, it does not mean that you've reached product market fit. It does not mean that you have a great business. It just means that what you showed them on that website was appealing enough for them to plop down whatever amount of money they plop down. So I guess that would be my takeaway for those types of things specifically, is like, I think it's a fine tool. I would not use it as a measure of product market fit.
Got it. Okay. Gaurav, do you want to go ahead and try asking your question again?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my question is around so there's a deadline coming up, and I have a personal sort of like time is of the essence for me. I'm expecting a baby in January. I'm expecting a sort of like a huge like sort of like life change at that time. In terms of like we heard Kasar you talk about like profit is number one. If you have profit, like everybody's listening, and then there's revenue, and then there's like how many people are engaged with your product, and like so on and so forth. So if your idea doesn't have those things, if you just have like a prototype or something like that, and you wanted to kind of like test out the revenue, what's more important? Is it more important to make the deadline with just your idea, or is it more important, because I know they keep accepting applications even after the deadline, to get the revenue, and then like maybe around like November or something, December, like send in your video or your application with revenue?
Right. Very good question. My answer is both. Do both. Make your put your application in by the deadline, but you can always email us with updates, right? And I think actually the tool itself allows you to update certain parts of the application. So this is very common. Like people will apply and then they will email us in 4 weeks and they'll say like, "Hey, wanted to update you. Here's the progress we've made." And so yeah, like I think that's the best approach. We certainly accept late applications, but there is way less of a guarantee that we will have time to spend reading your application if it comes in really late. So I would not risk it and try to optimize for that. I would put it in and then send updates.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So looks like Wei has a question regarding evaluating competition. Do you want to unmute and ask that, Wei?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have one question before that. So you mentioned a lot of applications got $500,000. I wonder what some of them got more, and you also mentioned that's the question. First question.
Oh, I think what I'm referring to is all YC companies. When you get YC funding, it's $500K.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My main question was so you mentioned something that about the background when you started out. So you mentioned Facebook, Twitter was about to enter the mainstream. Actually, Dropbox was also founded in 2007.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you think you started relatively early, before the competition? And how did you think back then, and how do you think the situation like now?
Gotcha. You're talking about Google Photos specifically.
Yeah, photo sharing. Yeah, when you
yeah. I think Dropbox is a YC company. In fact, Dropbox was one of the main reasons that we applied to YC, because we used Dropbox and we loved it, and we heard that they did YC. I would say like each of those products are actually solving a very different problem for different users. So, when we were thinking, like in the very early days of Google Photos, before we got acquired, like when we were still at our startup, I did not think of Facebook, sharing photos on Facebook, or, putting photos or files into a Dropbox folder. I did not think of those as competition, because they didn't solve the problem that I was trying to solve. I didn't use those things those things did not sufficiently solve my problem that I personally had. And so, yeah, it wasn't even like on my radar. And in fact, I would say, nothing was, because if there had been a solution that like was really great, I would have just used it. You know, we weren't like seeking a like startup idea at that point. Like we had a startup that had a lot of users. We just had realized like, wow, they're all using it to do this photo stuff. And like, why don't they use something else? What's wrong with these people? And I think that's often like the best indication that you've actually got a real problem, is that you see people going out of their way to use a product that's not intended for what they're using it for. That's always a great sign. Like you want to see that, because it means that they care a lot about solving the problem, but like nothing that they found has solved it for them.
Do you think? Yeah. So do you think if you started, say, I guess probably no, but want to ask you, if you started 1 year later, do you think you would have the same outcome?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, had we started working on the photo management stuff a year later, let's see, like like in 2014 instead of 2013, I think we would have come to the same conclusion. And I don't think anybody at that point was really thinking the same way that we were. I do know that some folks at Dropbox were like-minded, and they were building Carousel at the time, which was their photo management product. So I think there were a number of smart people who were kind of like at the forefront or at the frontier of technology that were like starting to see that this problem was going to be big. But like even Apple, to be honest, like they hadn't built iCloud yet. And so there was no like solution in the Apple ecosystem either.